As Republican lawmakers look into the potential of impeaching Wisconsin's newest Supreme Court justice, they're also considering a move that Speaker Robin Vos called an off-ramp to impeachment. Vos announced that he's created a panel of 3 former state Supreme Court justices to look into the criteria for impeaching Justice Janet Protasewicz. Republicans believe she can't be unbiased when ruling on redistricting lawsuits that could come before the court. She called the voting maps rigged during her campaign, but didn't say how she'd rule. The day after Speaker Vos made that announcement, Republicans introduced a bill to change the redistricting process so it would be handled by nonpartisan legislative staff instead of the legislature. The Assembly passed it late Thursday night, sending it on to the Senate. The redistricting bill proposed by lawmakers in the Assembly is being touted as an Iowa-style nonpartisan model. But how exactly does Iowa draw its maps? Here to break that down is Barry Burton, a UW-Madison political science professor. Welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So first off, how familiar are you with Iowa's redistricting process?
Well, I've been observing the redistricting process across the states for 20 years and paid special attention to Iowa because it is typically held up as one of the best models of redistricting in the country. And as a next door neighbor to Wisconsin, it seems like a place we could learn something from.
Right now in Wisconsin, state and congressional legislative lines are both drawn by the state legislature, subject to a governor's veto. So, with your research, how does Iowa's process work?
It's a pretty different process. The legislature is mostly not involved. The drawing of districts is a job for a state agency of nonpartisan public employees who are given essentially data from the census and no other information about voting patterns or the preferences of people across the state for one party or the other, or even where candidates live, because they might have a say over where district lines are drawn. That agency then proposes sets of maps that meet some identified criteria in the law. Those are handed to the state legislature. The legislature can accept them or reject them as they are. If they accept them, those are the maps for the next 10 years. If they reject them, the agency gets a second try to produce another round of maps. The same process would follow. The legislature can accept or reject. If they reject a second time, the agency gets one last opportunity. If that last final third set of maps is rejected, the situation is then handed over to the state Supreme Court, which will propose a remedy. That has never happened in the history of the process in about 50 years in Iowa, but that's the end point if the agency's maps are not accepted.
How does that compare with the new process Wisconsin lawmakers have proposed?
It's almost identical. There are tremendous similarities between the bill that was released this week and the Iowa system. In some cases, it's word for word. There are some small differences along the way that have to do with differences in the timing of elections and so on in the states. But there is one big difference at the end of the process. The final step in Iowa, if the legislature rejects 3 rounds of maps, is that the map process, the line drawing process, is handed to the state Supreme Court. In the Wisconsin bill, the final step, if all 3 maps are rejected, is that the legislature gets to draw the maps. They get to amend that final set of maps in any way they wish. So it essentially reverts back to the system that already exists in Wisconsin if the legislature doesn't like the maps that the agency proposes.
So if the legislature in Wisconsin is still controlled by Republicans, would that mean that the maps would then continue to favor them, as many have said?
That's exactly right. If Republicans who run the process in the legislature are not happy with the first 2 versions they would get from the Legislative Reference Bureau, they would have the option to turn that third and final set into whatever they want, which could be very much like the current set of maps that are in place and are being contested, or some other proposal that maybe benefits them even more. It's really unknown. There's sort of an escape hatch built into the back end of the process in the proposal here that just doesn't exist in the Iowa model.
Barry Burton, thank you so much for your expertise this morning.
Glad to be with you.